to my Temeraire video. Temeraire is a series of books, 9 books long, heavily involved with dragons. I read all of them this May, and I love them so much I wanted to dedicate an entire video to talking about them. So I'm going to start off with a lack of spoilers, just talking about them generally, so you can kind of get an idea about whether these books are for you and it's something you'd like to check out if you haven't yet. And then as it goes on, I will make you aware when I'm going to go into a more spoilery section, and it will get more and more spoilery as we go on, so that in the end I will be doing kind of in-depth analysis type stuff for people who have already read the books and want to kind of discuss the nitty-gritty detail type things. So this is the Temeraire series from first to last. It's quite a lot of stuff. They are by one of my now favorite authors, Naomi Novik. She also wrote Uprooted, which I've talked about a lot. I mentioned these a little bit in my May wrap-up video, so if you would like to know about a shorter version of this video, plus all the other stuff I read in May, that will be linked below. I'll start with the non-spoilery section, mostly talking about what goes on in the first book, but I'll also talk about a couple of themes that go on throughout that aren't spoilers, just let you know whether you'd like it. First of all, what genre is it? Basically, it's something like a fantasy crossed with a historical fiction. Someone summed it up really well with one of the quotes on the back. Yes. Novik's influences run the gamut from Jane Austen to Patrick O'Brian, with a side trip through Anne McCaffrey. That is, the timing is set during when Jane Austen's novels were set, which is around the early the first and second decade, mostly the first decade of the 1800s. And Patrick O'Brian, I have learned, is someone who wrote a lot about the Napoleonic Wars, which were in the same time period. For reference, as far as what time period this is in America, this was when the Louisiana Purchase was made, because Napoleon was selling off stuff in America because he needed to fund his war, and it was very much pre-Civil War, but post-America had been set up. And from what I am not totally familiar with Napoleonic stuff, but apparently he's the one who came into power after the French Revolution, which was kind of inspired by / came after the American Revolution. So there was the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and now the people in power, the person in power is Napoleon. And so he is a very capable conqueror type who doesn't like the old system with the aristocrats, but he's kind of set himself up as one while claiming to not be one. And so our characters, of course, are not going to be the Napoleonic characters, as they're mainly considered the bad guys, mostly because they lost in the end. So the story of the Temeraire series focuses on English characters. The main character, Captain William Lawrence, you hardly ever see his first name. Captain Lawrence is a naval captain in the British Navy, and he happens upon a dragon's egg. And then he happens to bond with the baby dragon that comes out of the dragon egg, much to his chagrin and distress. And basically the reasons for that are that he was raised as part of the aristocracy, and there comes in the Jane Austen bit where he was raised in the same society as Mr. Darcy and those sorts of people, so he talks that way, and it's very cute. And since most of the books are written from his perspective, a lot of the writing of the prose is very much Jane Austen-esque, which is really delightful when it's also that kind of stuff, but in the context of war going on, and like how Jane Austen would have described people getting shot, stuff like that. It's fascinating and a lot of fun. So the aviators are the people who ride dragons for the British military, and the the aviators are not classy. They are not in with the whole upper class crowd. Some of them are from upper class, much like a lot of upper class people would send their sons to the Navy. At 12, you send your sons, your third or fourth sons, because you don't care about them very much, to the aviators at 7. And so they're raised in this whole other way from how most people are raised in this society, or at least most aristocrats are raised. Aviators tend to be very plain-spoken. There's not a lot of formality in the hierarchy. Oh, and they're banned from dueling, which comes in, because this main character is the sort of person who would duel. Because I don't like to say idiot, because he's really intelligent in almost every way. The only place he's completely unintelligent is in these areas where he's kind of been brainwashed by his upper class society to think that things are totally normal and necessary that are totally abnormal and totally unnecessary. And that causes him quite a lot of trouble throughout the series. So, because this dragon has bonded to him, he has to go and join the aviators, and so there's a big culture clash, and also he can't have the life he would normally have. As is said throughout the series, a lot of times aviators don't make birth, or they don't rest in port between wars and such. They stay with their dragons because their dragons are very heavily bonded to them, and they're very heavily bonded to their dragons. They don't want to be away from each other, and most people don't really want a dragon hanging out on their lawn, so they can't go home. They have to stay in these coverts, or what they're called, where all the dragons and aviators live together and have their little hermity type culture, where they're pretty much only friends with each other because nobody else wants to associate with them, and they are weird and cast out, basically. So throughout the first book, most of what we're dealing with is Lawrence bonding with his dragon growing up, and Lawrence's culture shock and dealing with the culture shock of becoming an aviator, and also training to become an aviator because they wage war from Dragonback. Napoleon also has dragons. All the countries of the world have their own dragons, and so they fight wars with them. Some of them are quite big. They get to be big enough to carry 300 men. So I don't know how big that would be for scale, but I imagine them pretty dang big. And the smaller ones, the smallest in the entire series, I believe, are about the size of a pony. So there are no little tiny ones like there are in Dragon Keeper Chronicles, but other than that, every type of variety there is throughout the books. As for whether you would like it or not, I liked it a lot, so if you've noticed you have similar taste to me, that's a recommendation in and of itself. I also really like detailed battle descriptions with this, which this definitely has. There's a lot of Dragonback battles, and they are quite thoroughly described, and I think they're quite well thought out about how this would actually work. I think Naomi Novik has done a great job, like, not half doing it. She's gone all the way, really thought it out, really put the work in. And she's also done the work to figure out how dragons would culturally fit into various societies, because we see not only dragons in the English society, but also in other societies, which I'll talk more about later in the video. But we definitely see she's just done a really good job of showing and thinking about how things would really work if dragons were a part of this stuff. But as usual, one of the biggest things that I like about books, and this book in particular, this series in particular, is the characters and their relationships with one another. In this series, the dragons are intelligent. They're like sentient, speaking like people do, thinking not like people do, but you know what I mean. They speak whatever languages they heard around their egg when they were before they hatched. And so Temeraire, the dragon who is bonded to Lawrence, speaks English when he comes out, and I think he comes out also speaking French, because he was captured from a French ship. What was I saying? The characters. I love Lawrence. He's so cute. He's just a sweet little thing. Lawrence, he's, as I said, he was brought up as a upper class gentleman, that's what they're called. But he was also brought up as a naval officer from the time he was 12. So he's very much a military man. And he has this culture shock to deal with, part of which is the lack of formality, part of which is women being involved, because there are some dragons who will only accept women as riders. And so unlike the rest of the British military, there have to be women among the aviators. And so that's quite a shock for poor Lawrence, who is of the who has held to this point, has been taught to this point that women are very fragile and need to be taken care of and shouldn't be exposed to the horrors of war. He's very much the sort who thinks that sex and, well, he doesn't like to discuss sex at all, but he thinks that sex and war and blood and stuff shouldn't be discussed in the presence of women, and all sorts of stuff like that. So when he finds out that when he meets women among the aviators, first of all, he's shocked. He thought they were men because they were dressed like men. They weren't wearing big skirts. So he's like, oh, that's a woman. And he's quite horrified, but not in a, oh no, you're bad, go stay in your place kind of way, and a more like, oh no, you're gonna get hurt kind of way. And not in a, he doesn't think women are incapable, he just thinks they shouldn't be exposed to the harsher realities of life. But he never treats them badly, or he would always treat them as equals, if not with deference. He actually usually treats them with a certain amount of deference. He never goes around thinking or talking like these women aren't capable or like anything like that. And actually he's he's just so cute. He's quite friendly. He's a friendly person. He wants to be nice. Even though he's been taught to look down on aviators, he doesn't, because he doesn't like to judge people for superficial things. He does a little bit for crass manners. He judges people for crass manners, but he doesn't judge the whole people based on what he's heard. And so he tries to be friendly. Captain Harcourt is one of the women dragon riders he meets early on, and he joins the formation up. Dragons fly in formation, so they have little teams of dragons with their riders and also with their crews. Each dragon has a crew of about 10 to 30 people, depending on how big the dragons are, and some of the people on the crew have rifles. There to shoot at ships or other dragons. Some are there to protect if they get boarded. Some are there to, there's a signal ensign who puts up flags and interprets other people's flags for the captain and the dragon so they know what to do. Various things like that. And so Lawrence and Temeraire are put on the team of this Captain Harcourt and her dragon Lily. And he's just really cute. He asks Captain Harcourt why she named her dragon Lily, and she's kind of embarrassed because she was kind of rushed into it. They didn't expect the egg to hatch, so they had to go grab her, bring her, have her meet this baby dragon before it decided it didn't want any rider. And so she had to come up with it quite quickly, and she was kind of embarrassed about it. She was kind of terse about it, so then he explained why he named Temeraire what he did, and how it just popped into his head suddenly when he was put on the spot, and so that makes her more comfortable to tell him that she just came up with hers on the spot too, because she didn't know what she was doing. She was very young. She is 19, I believe, when the books start, and she's just a little baby. But her dragon, her type of dragon, is the leader of formations, and dragons determine rank as opposed to experience of the riders, because dragons have a certain thing where they're not always totally great at taking orders, and they're more likely to actually follow the lead dragon than the lead captain. Anyway, just really cute little interactions between Lawrence and the other dragon riders, and he's not a prejudiced person, even though he was trained very much in the way that would make a person prejudiced. He doesn't act on them or think that way. One of the ways that I like novels to be written is when all of the descriptions that happen in the book are kind of from that person's perspective. I guess it's deep third person is what it's called. It's basically like third person but written as if it's first person. If that makes any sense at all. You can tell they're written that way most easily, and it's not just the author's voice but actually the character's voice if the author writes multiple different characters' perspectives. In the later books we actually get some of Temeraire's perspective, and that's really interesting, so you can contrast it between his and Lawrence's, and you can pretty much tell which one's Temeraire and which one's from Lawrence's point of view, even though both characters are often together in them and would be able to relate the information. They have very different voices, and one of the things that's so cool about this series is Temeraire and Lawrence's relationship. Dragons in this series tend to have a much more simple way of looking at things. They're not nearly so influenced by overarching culture. They're much more what makes sense to them and more like instinct, I guess, and they can read and learn that way. But since they become adults so quickly, they kind of form their opinions fairly quickly, and not necessarily through the culture of their country, but more through the culture of their person, and if they've been exposed to wider culture through reading, which Lawrence reads to his dragon because he finds out that Temeraire likes it, so he does it, and it's adorable. And there's also quite a lot of affection between aviators and their dragons. They tend to call their dragons my dear. There's an acceptedness of their being inseparable. Lawrence sleeps outside with his dragon a fair amount. He also does some things, even though he's brand new to the aviators and doesn't want to cause waves. So you know how, I figure you know how, if you have a horse and you take it out riding, when you get back in, you don't leave on all the stuff all day until you come back the next day and have it ready, saddled and bridled and everything. You would never do that to a horse. Once you get back in, when you're done riding, you take off the saddle, you take off the bridle, usually rub them down, brush them, make sure there's nothing making them uncomfortable, right? So when Lawrence first gets to the aviators' covert, they're not doing that for the dragons. They're just leaving all the dragons' tack on overnight, and when they're not working with them, and not cleaning it either. So he's just like, ain't doing that. And so he takes all, he has his little baby crew. Since they start them at 7, they have like 10-year-olds working with the dragons. They have the 7-year-olds getting educated how to work with dragons. They have the 10-year-olds actually working with dragons. So he has a bunch of his little 10-year-olds take off Temeraire's stuff. Temeraire has grown quite big by this point. Temeraire is one of the bigger dragons. He has them take off all the stuff and takes Temeraire down to the lake for a bath. And just because that's what will make his dragon more comfortable. And he couldn't even conceive of just leaving that stuff on over when it doesn't need to be on, because how could that possibly be comfortable? And even though he really doesn't like doing awkward things or making people uncomfortable, he's willing to do that in order to make sure his dragon is well taken care of. Which of course starts a little bit of a trend when the other dragons see his dragon getting all their stuff, his stuff taken off and getting a bath. They think they might like to do that, which both causes trouble for Lawrence with the other aviators and also makes some of them like him because they think it's cute too. And just throughout the series, Lawrence and Temeraire are just so cute, and Lawrence is really cute with a bunch of other people too. And another thing that I really like about him, he's a little bit of a prude, not in a bad way. Like most people who are prudish, it's in a gross, shaming other people way. He's just in a, he doesn't want to hear sex talked about, and he doesn't want, he really doesn't want to talk about it in the presence of women. Like, he's okay with other people talking about it near him, but he doesn't want to talk about it in relation to his own experience or anything like that. And he has a really hard time with the aviators because it's very difficult for them to get married because anyone they married would have to put up with their dragon as well, and with not being the person of primary importance because their dragon is a person of primary importance. So they have a much laxer view of sex outside of marriage than what he was raised with, which gives him a bit of difficulty and a bit of awkwardness, and I just relate really heavily to that. So he's not particularly, he's straight and not asexual, but he's not really much of a sexual person. He just has better things to do most of the time. And I really relate to that, and I really like that. And when other people talk about, when his parts of his crew have gone off to find prostitutes, he's like, ugh, stupid kids. Anyway, I really like that part. Okay, so now we're moving into the... Sorry I've talked so long. I'm going to talk a while longer, so I don't feel bad if you don't want to stick around for this whole video. I'm going to move into a slightly spoilery section, and that next I'm going to tell you what, not what order, but a kind of a reading plan for how to read these, because there are some that end with cliffhangers and there's some that don't, so I'm going to tell you which ones end with cliffhangers without explaining, you know, what kind or how they end or anything, just so you can know which books you want to have the next one on hand for when you finish it. So, the first three, I don't know where the first one has gone, but the first three, the one I was holding up earlier, plus these two, no real cliffhangers at the ends of any of the first three, so you don't have to worry about that. The next three, Empire of Ivory is number 4, then Victory of Eagles, then, oh there's His Majesty's Dragon, that's the first one. Then Tongues of Serpents. There are some cliffhangers in these. The end of this one has a really bad cliffhanger that you definitely want to have this one on hand when you finish this one. And then this one has kind of a medium cliffhanger where it's not as bad as the one between these two, but it's very much, you can't just leave it there. And so I would recommend reading these 3 in a row. So like a good way to break it up might be the first 3, then these 3, and then you could do the last 3. So like 333 would be a good way to break up the 9, because the other cliffhanger is between the last 2, Blood Tyrants and League of Dragons. Whereas Crucible of Gold stands on its own quite well, and there's a quite satisfactory, you want to know more about what happens next, but it's not like urgent, like you would feel okay going off for quite a while and doing other things before you needed to pick up the next one. Things are quite content at the end of this one. So that's how I would recommend reading it. If you're more of a one at a time person, the only ones that it's urgent you read in a row are these 2, and then the next worst would be having these 3 all in a row would be the best thing to do. The other ones, it's not nearly as important to have the next one on hand. Even this one, it's not really bad, the cliffhanger. It's kind of medium. So if you have decided to read these books because of this video, first of all, comment below and tell me about it. Second of all, once you've read them, come back for this part, and I would love to hear what you think about all the individual things I'm going to be talking about, because they're fun and interesting, to me anyway.